Welcome back to Forgotten Ties. There are certain moments in life, aren't there? Moments where the veil between the life you thought you lived and the sheer, stark reality of what was truly hidden is violently ripped away. For most of us, our identity, the very core of who we are, is a given. It's written on a piece of paper, confirmed by the familiar faces of our parents, and cemented in the stories told around the dinner table. But what if those stories were a lie? Not just a little white lie, but a monumental, crushing edifice of secrecy, built up over decades and waiting for one small, innocuous action to bring the entire thing tumbling down? This is the story of Elara Vance, a woman whose world was not just shaken, but fundamentally dissolved by the discovery of a single, brittle piece of parchment, tucked away in the most unlikely of crypts, a music box. Elara, at 32, was the kind of person who found comfort in the quiet persistence of the past. As an art restorer, her days were spent meticulously patching the cracks in forgotten canvases, bringing back the muted vibrance of centuries-old colors. She lived in Portland, Oregon, a city of mist and old money, and had recently inherited the sprawling, slightly suffocating Victorian home of her grandmother, Vivian. Vivian had been a formidable woman. Stoic, impeccably dressed, and possessing an almost glacial reserve that kept the world, including her granddaughter, at a respectful, if slightly chilly, distance. The house was a museum of her life, filled with heavy velvet curtains, the perpetual scent of aged wood and lavender, and shadows that seemed to linger even after the brightest noon sun. Elara loved the house, but there was a deep, underlying unease, a sense that the atmosphere itself was holding its breath. It was during the slow, contemplative process of organizing Vivian's estate that the music box reappeared. It wasn't just a music box, it was the music box. Sitting on the mantel in the parlor, a dark, gleaming Swiss creation from the late 1800s, heavily carved with intertwined vines and mythical creatures. It was the only item Elara was explicitly forbidden to touch as a child. "It's fragile, Elara," Vivian would say, her voice a low, chilling warning, "Don't even breathe on it." The warning had stuck, morphing from simple parental caution into something almost mythic in Elara's mind. It was Pandora's box, an anchor to an unspoken past. Now, though, in the silence of the empty house, the prohibition felt absurd. Elara ran a gloved hand over the cool, oiled walnut. The box was heavy, about the size of a small loaf of bread, and she could feel the faint whirring of the mechanism inside, even at rest. The key was a tiny gold filigree piece, still in the lock. Curiosity, a slow burn that had been banked for 3 decades, finally roared into a consuming flame. She turned the key. The sound that emerged was not the cheerful, tinkling melody she had expected. Instead, a deep, resonant, and almost mournful tune filled the air, a waltz, but one that seemed steeped in tragedy. As the music began to play, Elara noticed something she'd never seen before, or perhaps never dared to look for, a hairline seam along the front panel, cleverly disguised by the carving. It wasn't just a music box, it was a strongbox, a container with a hidden compartment. Her heart, already fluttering with the nostalgia of the tune, began to hammer against her ribs with something far darker, the adrenaline of transgression. With trembling fingers, she pressed on a particularly ornate knot in the wood, just as a minor chord swelled in the melody. Click! The front panel, a masterpiece of woodworking, slid away, revealing a space that was not empty, but lined with faded purple silk. And resting on the silk, folded meticulously into quarters, was a piece of paper. It was crisp, yellowed, and official. Her hands, usually steady as she worked with priceless artifacts, shook uncontrollably as she lifted it out. The paper unfolded with the sound of a sigh. It was a birth certificate, and the name on it was not Elara Vance. The document was faded, but the bold, official stamps were undeniably clear. The name listed under child's name was Lillian Ashworth. The date of birth was the same as Elara's. The hospital was in the same city. But then came the devastating blow, the detail that atomized her entire reality. Listed under mother's name was a woman she had never heard of, Amelia Ashworth. Her mind struggled, desperate to apply logic to the illogical. Was this a coincidence? A stranger's document, left in a hidden compartment? No. The dates matched. The city matched. And the crushing, silent weight of Vivian's years of secrecy suddenly made sickening, perfect sense. The music stopped, leaving a terrifying void of silence in the room. Elara looked at the name Lillian Ashworth, and then at her own reflection in the dark, polished wood of the piano, seeing not Elara Vance, but a ghost, a construct, a magnificent lie. She was not the person she thought she was. She was someone else's child, hidden behind the mask of her grandmother's carefully cultivated deception, a secret locked away and only released by the mournful, heartbreaking cry of a forgotten waltz. This single sheet of paper was not just a document, it was a detonation device, set to obliterate the history of the woman who held it. The questions began to form, slow and chilling, like frost creeping across a windowpane. Who was Amelia Ashworth? And why did Vivian steal her? The answers, Elara instinctively knew, would be far darker than the shadows in the parlor. The revelation of the name Lillian Ashworth didn't just pose a question, it initiated a complete systemic failure of Elara's reality. Imagine holding the single, undeniable proof that your entire life, your birthday parties, your family photos, the very DNA you thought defined you, was a masterful forgery. That's the cold, seismic shock that ran through her. She clutched the birth certificate, the frail paper feeling heavy as a tombstone, and her beautiful, fiery red hair seemed to suddenly feel foreign, not quite hers. The meticulous restorer of art suddenly had to try and restore her own, utterly shattered identity. The immediate, overwhelming compulsion was to confront the one person who could explain the monstrous deception, but Vivian was gone. The only conversation left was with the silent, echoing house and the relics she left behind. Elara, or Lillian, whatever her name now was, didn't sleep for days. She subsisted on coffee and the raw, electric energy of shock, spending every waking moment tearing through her grandmother's vast, organized chaos. Vivian's meticulousness, the very trait that had always made her seem so trustworthy, now appeared sinister. Everything was filed, labeled, and dated. And yet, there was nothing. No journals detailing the adoption, no letters mentioning an Amelia Ashworth, not even a cryptic note. It was a vacuum, a surgically clean erasure of a life. The silence was deafening, the lack of evidence a horrifying confirmation of the depth of the conspiracy. Then, there was the music box itself. The compartment was empty now, save for the silk lining. Elara studied the carving, the intertwined vines and mythical beasts. She focused on the hidden seam, the point of weakness that revealed the truth. It was a mechanism designed to be found, but only by someone who knew how and, more importantly, when to look. Was this Vivian's way of confessing from beyond the grave? A delayed, cruel act of penance? Or a final, heartless way to watch her granddaughter's world burn? The only lead was the name, Amelia Ashworth. Elara typed it into the deepest corners of the internet, searching public records, archives, old newspaper clippings. Nothing immediate. It was too common a name, or perhaps too far removed in the past, deliberately buried. This wasn't a casual secret, it was a deeply protected, almost professional-level concealment. Weeks bled into one another, marked only by the growing despair in Elara's emerald eyes and the expanding pile of fruitless search results. She was beginning to feel like she was chasing smoke. Until one rainy Tuesday, sifting through a forgotten box of Vivian's papers labeled Old Family Receipts, she found it. Tucked beneath an invoice for a 1993 upholstery cleaning was a small, square, black and white photograph. It was an old, somewhat faded image of two young women, laughing on a park bench. They looked remarkably similar, both with a certain sharp elegance and dark, almost Italianate features. But there was one difference that made Elara's blood run cold. One of the women was Vivian, younger, vibrant, and unguarded. The other had eyes that were Elara's own. Not the color, but the distinct shape, the slight upward tilt, the intensity. A terrifying, immediate recognition slammed into her. Scrawled in Vivian's elegant, spidery script on the back was a single, curt notation, A 1990. The photograph was taken 2 years before Elara/Lillian's birth. This was not just a friend. This was someone intimately connected to Vivian's life, close enough to share a joyous moment and, crucially, close enough to be secretly erased. The two women looked like sisters, or at least very close confidants. Could Amelia Ashworth have been Vivian's sister? A cousin? The idea of a familial connection, of the secret being contained within the immediate bloodline, made the betrayal even more profound. It wasn't just an adoption. It was an abduction concealed behind a veneer of family loyalty. With the photo in hand, the search criteria narrowed. Elara switched her focus from general name searches to local newspaper archives from 1990 to 1992, specifically looking for any articles concerning Vivian Vance and a person matching the description in the photo. She spent a harrowing, caffeine-fueled night, scrolling through microfiche-like digital pages, the ghost of her grandmother's face haunting every column. Finally, at 4:17 a.m., a headline leaped out at her, an inky, screaming indictment from the past. A small article, buried deep in the local section of the Portland Times, dated October 1992, "Local Woman Vanishes After Dispute." The article described the disappearance of a 28-year-old local woman, an aspiring musician named Amelia Ashworth. The description matched the photograph with chilling accuracy. But the true gut punch came in the final paragraph. The police were investigating a known associate who was the last person to be seen with Ashworth after a heated argument over personal matters. The associate was not named, but the location of the dispute was the Vance family's secluded property on the outskirts of the city. Elara's secluded, inherited home. The sheer horror of the connection rendered her momentarily paralyzed. Vivian didn't just take her. Vivian was potentially the last person to see her real mother alive. The secret was no longer just an illicit document. It was a criminal act, a cold case suddenly burning hot, an abyss opening up in the very floorboards of the house she now inhabited. The joyful melody of the music box seemed to echo in the room, no longer a waltz, but a dirge, beckoning Elara/Lillian toward the terrifying truth that her safe, quiet life had been built atop a suspected tragedy. A violent act that had been meticulously concealed for over 3 decades. The house was not just a repository of memories, it was a crime scene, and she was the only living witness to the ghost of her mother's final moments. The police report, the mention of the known associate, and the heated dispute at the Vance property didn't just raise the stakes, it transformed the entire narrative from a sad story of a stolen identity into a potential case of murder. Elara, or Lillian, was now living in the epicenter of the crime, sleeping under the same roof where her biological mother, Amelia Ashworth, had possibly vanished forever after a final, desperate confrontation with Vivian. The sheer scale of Vivian's calculated deception began to crystallize, chilling Elara to the very bone. Vivian hadn't just adopted a child, she had taken her, possibly eliminating the only person who could have fought back. The grief for the life she never knew, the mother she never met, was now superseded by a cold, righteous fury. Elara had to know the nature of the dispute. Why would two women who looked so close in the photograph escalate to a point of no return? And why, above all, would Vivian take the child and raise her as her own, maintaining a facade of familial normalcy? This level of twisted psychological complexity felt almost Shakespearean in its cruelty. Elara went back to the house, but this time, the shadows felt malevolent, the silence oppressive. She wasn't looking for documents anymore, she was looking for a confession. She started with Vivian's study, a room she rarely entered, sealed off by a heavy oak door. It was an intimidating space, lined with leather-bound books and a massive mahogany desk. She focused on the desk, searching the deep, hidden drawers that even the estate inventory had missed. Buried beneath a collection of old fountain pens and a dried-out inkwell, she found a small, leather-bound diary without a year marked on the cover. It wasn't a narrative journal, but a collection of terse, almost coded entries. Elara's hands shook, not with fear, but with the focused anticipation of a surgeon about to make a critical incision. The diary was dated sporadically between 1990 and 1993, the exact window of the tragedy. The early entries were filled with resentment. Vivian's entry, 1991, A has everything I ever wanted. Talent, lightness, his affection. She takes it all for granted. The words were laced with a venomous envy that was completely at odds with the stoic, reserved woman Elara had known. Then, the entries shifted, growing darker, obsessively focused on one topic. A man. The cryptic references started to clear up. Amelia was the one who had the talent and his affection. Vivian, it seemed, had been in love with the same man who was the father of Amelia's child. Vivian's entry, May 1992, he chose her. Foolish, blind. But he will regret it. He will see what a mistake he has made when I show him what true loyalty looks like. The pieces were beginning to align into a devastating portrait of jealousy and possessiveness. The man, the father, remained unnamed, a phantom in the narrative, but his presence was the catalyst. Vivian's adoption wasn't an act of mercy, it was an act of vengeance, a psychological weapon designed to punish both Amelia and the man who rejected her. She wanted the child to be hers, to complete the family unit she felt entitled to, and to erase Amelia's existence from the child's life forever. The final entry, scrawled wildly across the last page, was the confession, cold and terrifying in its brevity. Vivian's entry, October 15, 1992, it's done. The argument went too far. I told her I would take the child and that he would never see either of them again. She came at me. There was the fall. The silence. Now, the child is mine. Elara Vance. She will never know Lillian Ashworth. The music box holds the lie. I only regret that the truth is trapped under the roots of the rose garden. The horror was immediate, visceral. The fall. The silence. And then the final, gut-wrenching clue. The truth is trapped under the roots of the rose garden. Elara stumbled back from the desk, knocking over a heavy globe. Her breath hitched, catching in her throat. The rose garden. The beautiful, sprawling, meticulously cared for rose garden that was Vivian's pride and joy, the one place in the entire property that always smelled sweet and vibrant, even in the deepest winter. It wasn't a beautiful garden, it was a cemetery. Vivian had literally buried the truth, and possibly, the body of Elara's biological mother beneath the very flowers she tended to every day. The final, dark confrontation was not with a living grandmother, but with the earth itself. The meticulous woman, the reserved matriarch, was a jealous, desperate killer who had spent 32 years cultivating beauty over a grave, raising her victim's child as her own personal trophy. Elara looked out the window at the dew-kissed petals of a deep red rose, and the innocence of the world completely shattered. The rose garden, the symbol of love and beauty, was now the site of the most profound betrayal and tragedy. She held the diary, the proof of a life destroyed, and knew her next action would finally unearth the full, chilling extent of Vivian Vance's terrifying secret. The final words of the diary, trapped under the roots of the rose garden, were not a metaphor. They were an address, a cold, hard geographical clue that left no room for interpretation or denial. Elara's meticulous mind, the one trained to restore delicate beauty, now had a terrifying new task, to dig up a brutal truth. The weight of that knowledge pressed down on her, the full, suffocating reality of her life. She was the daughter of a victim, raised by the person who had silenced her. The next few days were a blur of desperate, physical labor. Elara couldn't call the police yet. She needed irrefutable proof, the final, horrifying confirmation that would close the loop. She chose the oldest, most established part of the rose garden, a section where the roots were thickest and the soil was perpetually dark, the place where something had been deliberately and permanently planted. The work was agonizing, both physically and emotionally. Every spadeful of earth was a betrayal of the beautiful life she had lived. The scent of turned soil and rose roots filled the air, a sickening perfume of death and deceit. She dug for hours, driven by a raw, relentless need for truth, a need to finally give Lillian Ashworth's mother, Amelia, the dignity of a final resting place. And then, the sound. Not the soft crunch of soil, but a dull, unmistakable thud against something solid and unnatural. Elara dropped the spade, her breath catching in her throat, the emerald green of her eyes wide with a terrifying certainty. She knelt, her gloved hands scraping away the remaining earth, and what she uncovered was a dark, water-stained steamer trunk, meticulously concealed beneath the tangled roots of a massive climbing rose. It was heavy, sealed shut with a rusting, brass clasp. This was not a grave, not in the traditional sense, but a horrifying repository of a life ended. Elara found a crowbar in the potting shed and, with a final, desperate heave, forced the clasp open. The trunk creaked open like a coffin, releasing a musty, old air that smelled faintly of salt and fear. Inside, resting on a bed of yellowed linens, was a collection of Amelia Ashworth's life. A faded photo album filled with pictures of a smiling, musical woman. A few sheets of handwritten music, a beautiful, haunting composition titled Elara's Lullaby. And then, the ultimate, undeniable evidence, a small, dark velvet evening bag, which, when opened, contained Amelia's driver's license and a stunning, vintage platinum ring with a tiny, glittering emerald, the same shade as Elara's eyes. Vivian had taken the child, buried the mother, and then buried the proof of her existence beneath the very symbol of her own successful deception. The discovery was not one of relief, but a crushing confirmation of the depth of Vivian's psychosis. She had kept the body and the evidence on her property for 32 years, living a life built entirely on a dark, violent secret. She raised the girl as Elara, but everything, down to the name of the music box melody and the color of her eyes, was a final, haunting, personal signature left by the real mother, Amelia. Elara finally called the authorities. The ensuing investigation, fueled by the evidence of the birth certificate, the diary, and the trunk, was swift and terrifying. The rose garden was excavated, and the final, tragic truth was unearthed. The story made national headlines, the respected Portland matriarch, a lifetime of secrets, and a devastating crime of passion and envy. Elara Vance was gone. Lillian Ashworth stood in her place, a woman who had to grieve not just a mother lost, but a life that was never truly hers. The music box, the object of her childhood prohibition, now sits in a police evidence vault, its mournful waltz a permanent reminder of the moment a dark, decades-old truth was finally set free. Her journey from the quiet restorer of art to the seeker of her own buried history is a chilling testament to the fact that sometimes the deepest, most horrifying secrets are hidden in plain sight, tucked away in the beautiful, familiar objects of our lives. The truth is finally out. But the healing, the rebuilding of a life from a foundation of absolute lies, that journey has only just begun for Lillian. It's an incredible, heartbreaking piece of hidden history, and we at Forgotten Ties are committed to bringing you these stories of identity, secrecy, and the extraordinary things people do when driven by desperation. If this chilling story resonated with you, if the idea of a lifetime built on a lie keeps you up at night, then you know what to do. Don't let the secrets of the past be forgotten. Hit that like button, subscribe to Forgotten Ties, so you don't miss our next deep dive, and please, make sure you ring that notification bell so you are the first to know when a new earth-shattering story drops. Thank you for watching.